Many years ago in the city of Chicago, there lived a little bald electrical engineer. And he married a woman who had aspirations unusual for her time. She read Goethe in the original German. She was a feminist. And she studied literature at the University of Chicago under the novelist Robert Herrick. She wanted to be a writer. And he loved her very much. So much that the little bald engineer engaged the services of a famous architect to build her a house. And being an engineer and more concerned with form, with function than with form, he left the details of that house to his wife and the architect. And so she spent many hours in the great man's company talking about the house and literature and art and music and the architect's travels to far-off distant lands. The house got built, and conversation continued. And this being America and all, metastasized into an affair. It was messy. There were children involved. But the sinner wouldn't hold, and after years of domestic subterfuge and denial, the engineer's wife embarked on what she called a spiritual hijira, kind of like an eat, pray, love situation. She ran off to Europe with the architect, who loved her very much. So much that he built for his muse in the prairie country a shining house upon a hill. And one day the architect went into Chicago on business. And the cook he'd hired took an axe and killed the engineer's wife and her 2 children who were visiting and 4 other people. And he burned that beautiful house to the ground. Word got to Chicago about lunchtime. And the architect and the engineer, they went back to the country on a train that afternoon. They were in the same private car. Keep them away from the press. I've often wondered what, if anything, was said on that trip, and I've sometimes thought about writing a play, 1 act, 2 characters, but I've never been able to hack my way through the knot of snarl and sadness. But anyway, they arrived at the house and they walked over the charred grounds together. They were civil to each other, all the press reports said, and when the engineer made to leave, carrying the ashes of his children in a box he could hold in one hand, he spoke with no strife and no trouble in his voice. He said, "Goodbye, Frank. I spent the worst night of my life in Chicago on the weekend before Christmas 23 years ago. My wife at the time was living there pursuing her PhD at the U of C, Saul Bellow and Alan Bloom's Committee on Social Thought, and I was living on Little Rock. Every Friday I'd drive up, arriving at our apartment after midnight. And I thought our problems were due to the long-distance nature of our relationship and the financial strain of maintaining 2 households on an alternative journalist salary. When I got her on the phone, she was distracted, and I didn't even see her much during our visits. I knew if our marriage was going to work, I was going to have to move. And I was optimistic, driving up through snowy Missouri that Friday evening. I had an interview with the Chicago Sun-Times on Monday morning, so I cashed my paycheck. I was going to be opening a bank account in a big city. First thing we did when I got there was, like we always did, we went out to the 24-hour grocery store and picked up some provisions, and we weren't talking much, and I noticed that she was willfully detached, and after a while I stopped trying to force the conversation. And in this sallow, shadowless light of that supermarket, everything looked unwholesome and mean, and we rode back in silence. I got out of the car and I saw him. Corner of my eye, my lizard brain profiled him as dangerous. And I shifted the bags I was carrying from my right arm to my left. But hey, here's plenty of reasons. A little skinny little guy in a hoodie might be lurking outside the U of C married student housing complex at 2 a.m. on a freezing December night. And so for just a moment, I was a little bit ashamed of myself. But then he took a couple quick steps toward us, holding a screwdriver with a Dixie cup balanced on the tip of its blade in his hand, and I roughly pushed my wife through our building, through our outer door, into the foyer where she stumbled and spilled our groceries, and I yelled at her to get inside, which meant she had to unlock the inner doors. I made it through the outer one as our mugger, for his intentions were clear to me now, grabbing at my heavy coat. And I do not know how I caught him in the door jamb, but I do remember I held him helpless, leaning on the door of my left shoulder as I punched him with my right hand. Again and again and again and again. In his head, in his face. What was pent up was coming out. And he cussed and he spat and he swore, and I kept on hitting him until somehow he slipped away, fell away from the door, scrambled to his feet and began to run. And I went after him. I chased him down Ellis Avenue in the south side of Chicago, the baddest part of town, till I understand how foolish I looked, and I turned around and walked back, sweating, crying, and heartsick, and scared finally, and drained. And I looked down, my hand was throbbing, and the blood on my face, the gore on my hands was not my own. First thing I saw was my reflection in the inner door. And I saw her looking at me. And I saw horror in her eyes. She was afraid of me, and I don't blame her. She wouldn't let me in. But she did come out, and she sat on the stoop while I paced back and forth, ranting, waiting for the police. And I don't know why, when they got there, I started asking her questions and shaking their heads at my stupidity, that I was so belligerent. There were $700 bills in my wallet that night, and I don't know of a time before or since I've ever had that much cash on my person. So I guess I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. Felt like my life was over. They left, and I went to a hotel and spent some of that cash for a room. I headed back to Little Rock the next morning. Less than a year later, I took a job in Phoenix, Arizona. My ex-wife went to Paris to continue her studies at the Sorbonne. And in Arizona, I live without furniture. I found myself a murder case to dig into, and I never thought I'd ever come back to Arkansas. I never thought I'd ever come back to the South. But a newspaper editor asked me to, so I took advantage of his offer to fly in for an interview and visit some old friends. And as I walked into the office of the Democrat Gazette, I saw a girl I'd met a couple of years before. We'd met at a street fair, and we'd sit on the curb on Scott Street, talk for an hour or so. And because I was married, because she was involved, we didn't do anything else. And a couple weeks later, I was at her house in Capitol View after midnight, in that pleasant state that a couple of drinks can deliver you to when you are in the company of someone you thoroughly enjoy. And she opened up her back door, and in came a rangy black beast, all sideways, slipping legs and hot drool. And I laughed and I tackled him, and we rolled on the floor, and I guess I passed the audition. I do not like to say too much about my luck for fear it will evaporate. Things can change in an instant. We cannot account for all the world's mad and damaged and sorrowful, or keep your loved ones safe. Your house may burn down. Your very cells may rebel against you. And I can say with some certainty that you and all you love will die. There have been novels and operas written about the tragic love between Frank Lloyd Wright and his beautiful muse, Mamah, whom he liberated from a life of bourgeois comfort. But like Mrs. Lohman said, attention must be paid. Edwin Cheney was the name of that little bald engineer who looked like Elmer Fudd. He continued to live in that now famous house for a few years, and he remarried, and in the 20s, he moved to Missouri. He had more children. I hope, I even suspect, that he found happiness. But I'm just making that part up. I only know about me, and I don't believe much. I know faith is a gift which not everyone is blessed, but I believe there is hope, and that we might be rescued. Not because we are good and worthy, not by works, but by grace, by the kindness of others. I believe in love. I believe in its resuscitating power. Hell, like the Baptists say, I don't just believe in it, I have seen it done. Thank y'all.